Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the OHM Podcast. Now, this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Byron Hill, and Byron is the founder at Growth Labs. Now, these guys are an ecom agency, and they partner with 7- and 8-figure brands to make more profits using research and optimization across the entire sales funnel. So, Byron, great to have you.
Great to be here, Jordan.
Just to kick things off, do you mind just explaining what you mean by helping brands make more profits using research and optimization across the funnel?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about our background. When we first started, we were just a conversion rate optimization agency. And so when we did that, what we learned was that a lot of brands, they think they knew who their customer is, but they've never really done the research and the kind of background that they need in order to really identify who that is. And so what we do is we come in, we use that research and we use it across the funnel to understand who their customer is, why they buy from them, and more importantly, I guess, why they don't. And then use that across the funnel to optimize the sales funnel.
Okay. And then specifically in terms of the services that you guys offer, what does that look like when you say you work across the funnel?
Yeah, absolutely. So we like to focus on the optimization and the kind of strategy rather than the day-to-day management. So what that looks like in practice is running actual experiments across sales funnel. So on a monthly basis, we're going to do some form of research. That could be surveys, it could be interviews. There's many different things we could do. And then on the experimentation side, we might be optimizing, for example, a homepage or a product page, or we might be going into the email flows and optimizing those. And we're going to try to understand where the hiccups are, where the issues in the sales funnels are, and resolve them using experimentation.
Okay. And you mentioned you started off in CRO on the optimization side. Can you just walk me through the story and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started the company in 2019. A little bit of it wasn't intentional at all, I guess. I was actually working on a different business idea and decided I need to build a website for it. So I learned how to code in the process of doing that. And over time, learned that the product we were building kind of already existed. There was already a big competitor in the space, and it wasn't as good of a business idea as we originally thought. So at that point, I had this coding skill that I had learned, spent 2 months or so learning, and I posted on a job board in Canada here called Kijiji, and landed my first client just by kind of throwing a hook in the water and seeing what came up. And so in doing that, we got our first web development client, then did that for about a year and a half, I want to say. Following that, then we landed our first e-commerce client. Once again, wasn't really looking for an e-commerce client specifically, but we built them a new website. And in doing that, learned about conversion rate optimization and that process, and then began the transition to an agency about 3.5 years ago. So we started conversion rate optimization at that point. And then about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we realized that I loved the conversion rate optimization process, this process of using experimentation and really using the research and the learnings that we have to be able to optimize the sales funnel. But we didn't have a full effect. We had all these learnings and all this knowledge on the website, but we couldn't kind of leverage them in the marketing ecosystem or in their retention or their strategy as a whole as a business. And what we wanted to do was be able to do that. And so we transitioned into a full service marketing agency in order to be able to use those learnings elsewhere.
Okay. And are there any parts of that kind of stack that you won't touch from a marketing perspective?
No, not really. So we like to focus on the main channels. So we figure out where the main sales funnel is. We can use that. Generally, the brand knows where that is, but we can use Google Analytics to determine that kind of main flow. And then we'll pick out the channels that we really want to focus on. We try to stay away from the day-to-day as much as we can. So we're not going to be in the actual channels individually and doing the tweaks that a typical marketing agency would. We leave that to the brand or the agencies they're already working with. And we focus on the high-level strategy instead of that.
Okay. So is it more of a kind of advisory zoom out, take a look at the kind of full landscape and then provide that advice and they implement?
Exactly. Yeah. So the reason we want to do it that way is because typically when we're going to work with a brand, they already have the basics in place. So they already have someone handling their marketing, whether that's in-house or another agency. They already typically have an email agency like Open House, and then they have kind of the entire stack. Typically, they don't have someone doing optimization on the website, specifically those kind of mid 7-figure brands. And so we come in, we handle that, and then we handle the strategy and kind of assisting the other areas of the business as well.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And on your website, I know you split the kind of service into four buckets, so acquisition, conversion, retention, and operations. Can you just briefly break down those sections for me and talk about how you fit into each?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way that I can explain it is probably using the growth formula. So the growth formula, you can see it on our website. It is a simple formula that says we have traffic volume multiplied by conversion rate, multiplied by lifetime value, subtract variable costs equals profit margins. And that's what we use to explain our four services. So those first four metrics, traffic volume, lifetime value, conversion rate, and variable costs, those translate over to acquisition, conversion, retention, and operations. And what that means in practice is on the acquisition side, you might be on Google and Meta, for example, typical use case. And so we're going to help you get more traffic without increasing your variable costs, i.e. increasing ROAS, increasing cost contribution margin. On the conversion rate side, we're going to increase the percentage of visitors to your site that turn into customers, increasing your conversion rate. And then the lifetime value side, we can either increase the number of products per order by optimizing the website. We can increase the returning customer rate by optimizing email flows, purchase experience, all of those sorts of things. And on the operations side, admittedly, less of an impact that we can have on the operations side, but we can give recommendations. For example, reducing shipping costs, prioritizing products that have higher profit margins, those sorts of things.
Okay. And then how do you kind of plug the four together or bring those four pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah. So the growth strategy is probably going to be the easiest way we can do that. So when we first start working with a brand, actually before we sign contracts, anything like that, we're going to do what we call the growth strategy. So the growth strategy starts with three different types of research. Typically, we're going to do heuristic analysis, which is a fancy word for best practices and having an expert look at the sales funnel. And we're going to break everything down. We're also going to do a funnel analysis and then a financial analysis. So we're going to see, okay, where are the hiccups across the sales experience? And then on the other side of things, where financially do you have areas for improvement? We're going to look at those. And out of that, we're going to determine the metrics that have the most room for improvement or that we can have the most impact on the most quickly. And typically it's going to be one of those four: traffic volume, conversion rate, lifetime value, variable costs. We're going to determine what that is. We're going to give you recommendations to improve them. And then as part of that growth strategy, we actually do a roadmap for improving that key metric. And we start there, and then we repeatedly do that every 3 months, give or take. We do another one. And if that's still the same metric, we continue on the path. If there's a new metric that we believe we can have a better impact on, then we focus on that metric afterwards.
Okay, so it's kind of a multi-month per metric setup, and then you just kind of go through,
Yeah, so typically what we're going to see, the majority of brands anyways, is that conversion rate is the biggest area of improvement. Most brands already have someone that's optimizing for their traffic volume, someone that's, handling the financials, variable costs, and they typically, 6 times out of 10 sort of thing, have someone already in place for retention. And so conversion rate typically is kind of greenfield pastures. We can go in, we can optimize there, and then getting to the kind of 3-6 month portion. Okay, now we've started to optimize conversion rates. We have landing pages in place, product pages are optimized, home pages optimized, checkout. And then we can start branching out and start focusing on, okay, maybe how can we get more traffic volume by leveraging different creatives or by optimizing your email flows for retention, those sorts of things.
Okay, but it's very much, one focus area at a time.
Yeah, we like to focus on one primary metric at a time, similar to KPIs within a business in general. We like to focus that way. It allows our team to really hone in on what we're trying to do and be surface level with the brand in terms of what impact we're trying to have.
Okay. And do you ever get brands kind of coming to you and telling you what to do? Or is it you kind of looking and analyzing and coming up with that game plan?
Typically they don't actually, which admittedly I think was surprising a bit. I think the way we position ourselves and the way we've tried to position ourselves in the past as well has been very much there are problems in your business, and it's very difficult as a business owner. I'm sure you know this as well. It's very difficult to sit there and analyze your business when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the day-to-day. You really need to be able to step back, and a lot of business owners struggle with that. And so a lot of the brands that come to us as a result, they don't really know where the sticking point is. They just see their profit margins on the decline in 2024, for example, or they see these kind of the after effects. They don't see how to actually resolve the problem. A lot of them think that they need to test new meta ads, just push out more creatives, for example. That seems to be the consensus. And a lot of times that isn't the case. Sometimes, admittedly, it is, but 9 times out of 10, I think there's other areas of the business that can be improved.
Okay. And you mentioned there that, you're talking to brands and sometimes they might not be able to see what the issue is. How do you go from a brand knows that there's a problem, like you said, profit margins declining, whatever, to kind of getting them to work with you? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah. So just to clarify, you're asking kind of about our sales process?
Yeah, so a brand is looking at, they know there's potentially an area of your floor that's weak for them. What are you saying to them? Is there a report? Is there an audit? What does that look like? And then how do you convince them that's the way to go?
So typically when a brand's coming to us, we do a little bit of cold outreach, but we have an admittedly larger portion of referrals coming in over time. And so what we're typically going to have is someone coming to us and asking us for a growth strategy. That's step one. Admitting there's a problem, if you want to call it that. So we start from there and we're going to go, okay, discovery call first, understanding kind of where the business is at, where the business is trying to go, and how we can help them to bridge that gap. So that's discovery call. Following that, we're going to get access to everything we need for the growth strategy. So if we're doing a full funnel analysis with the growth strategy, then we need access to about 5 or 6 different platforms to really dive into the metrics, look at your creatives, look at your emails, all of that fun stuff. And then about a week after the discovery call, we're going to have the strategy call. That strategy call is going to dive into exactly what we found through the growth strategy. And then at the end of the growth strategy, there is what we call a kickstart offer. And what we found, there's kind of 2 reasons for the kickstart offer. So the first of which is brands typically don't want to take that jump into a big monthly retainer or, start firing their old agencies before they've really had a chance to work with you. That's definitely not something they're interested in doing. And so the kickstart offer is a one-time payment in exchange for optimizations at a high level. So we might be doing a product page redesign, for example. We might be bundling a batch of creatives or creating a new email flow, those sorts of things. So we're going to combine those together into what we call the kickstart offer. And then the other side of that is typically before we can get into that kind of granular experimentation phase, we need to do these big swing changes. A lot of brands don't even have landing pages set up, for example. And that's something that we need to do before we can start to optimize landing pages. We need to have them. And so the kickstart offer allows us to do that.
Okay. And what sort of brands, like sector, size, I'm thinking here, what sort of brands is what you do best suited for?
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have a niche that we specifically like to target. We do have a sort of minimum to be able to experiment. So a brand typically needs about 1,000 sales per month, give or take, in order for you to really be able to run proper experiments across the sales funnel for statistical validity sake. In terms of niches, we have a lot of experience in the outdoor brand space. That's kind of just happened. Our first of our few clients were in that space, and then we got referrals in that space and kind of started expanding there. But that wasn't exactly by design. It just sort of happened that way.
Okay. And you mentioned before your kind of research process is super in depth. Could you just run me through what that looks like and where you get your data from and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the heuristic analysis. So the heuristic analysis, we have a giant spreadsheet. It's got 300 or so data points on it. Essentially a best practices audit, but it's going to go across your meta ads, your Google ads, your website, your email flows, your strategy, and your offer. We're going to break all of those down. And then each of those has a 1 to 5 rating, essentially, all the way from not done to completed. How completed is it, essentially? And then out of that comes a priority score combined with how complete the item is. And then you get a score kind of across that area. Could be 50%, could be 75, whatever it is. And so that gives us an indication of the areas that have the most room for improvement in terms of just purely best practices. And then from that, we do the funnel analysis. We're going to look at your key metrics on each platform to understand kind of where they at against benchmarks of other brands that we've worked with or done audits for in the past. We're going to come up with a rough benchmark to understand that. And then the financial analysis is mostly just looking at profit margin and then cost of goods and understanding what's the relationship between those. What kind of brand are you? And where does your AOV and your lifetime value sit in relativity to that? And that's how we do that. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you're running these tests that you do, after you've got some data, are you coming back and then looking at the scorecard and the metrics again that you started with to see kind of, improvement and what needs to be tweaked after that?
Absolutely. So we're tracking against KPIs whenever we're doing an experiment. Typically on the website, for example, that's going to be revenue per visitor we're trying to improve. So revenue per visitor is a great metric because it combines conversion rate and lifetime value of a customer into a single metric. So we can kind of understand the relationship between those and how that changes with experiments on the website. On the marketing, for example, we might be tracking for contribution margin. That's typically going to be our number one. And the retention side of things, there's a couple of different metrics. It might be returning customer rate. It could be lifetime value. Depends.
Okay. Now, my next question is, I guess, a general agency one. Your service is very different to what a lot of other agencies do, where they kind of, pick and focus on one specific field. Why did you go this route? And what do you think other agencies are doing wrong when it comes to?
Great question. Yeah. So the reason we went this route, like I said before, was because in the past, when we were doing conversion rate optimization, focusing on that single service, I found that we had all of this knowledge we'd gained about a brand, but we couldn't leverage it. We could hand off the learnings in a document. We tried that a couple of times to the other agencies a brand was working with, but in reality, it didn't fit their processes. And so it never got used as a result of that. And we thought that if we could actually handle that, we could have a greater impact on the brand. Rather than focusing on one metric, we could focus on 4. And a lot of the times when we were doing conversion rate optimization, we'd get 6 months, 8 months, 10 months into a program. And now conversion has been optimized to a good point where, we can still obviously have an impact, but it might be better for us to start focusing on lifetime value, or it might be better for us to start focusing on traffic volume, those sorts of things that have a bigger benchmark for improvement, but we couldn't have that impact. And so that's why we transitioned into the full service model. And I think in terms of what agencies are doing wrong, I think it's less of agencies themselves are doing something wrong. And it's more so the fact that a brand feels the need to work with multiple agencies. That is a bit of an issue. And there's 2 main reasons for that. First of all, communication becomes a big issue. A lot of agencies, or a lot of brands rather, they're going to work with 4 agencies, for example. That could be someone for their marketing, one for their retention, one for ops, and then one for conversion rate optimization, for example. You might have 1 or 2 other in there for organic, for example, but typically 3 to 4 agencies. And as a result of that, they have 4 communication channels. They have 4 project management solutions. They have 4 people that they have to talk with on a biweekly basis, for example. And communication just becomes an absolute headache. And because of that, they can't really optimize against one another. Whereas when you can combine those into a single agency, you have 1 meeting on your calendar every 2 weeks. You have 1 project management solution, and everybody's aligned on what the goals of the program actually are. I think that helps a lot.
So it's almost a fractionalized CMO solution.
Exactly. That's a great way to explain it.
An agency partner. No, that makes sense. I like that. And I also saw from, when we spoke previously, you talked a lot about the Rocket framework. Can you just walk me through that and talk about what it entails?
Yeah. So the Rocket framework is an acronym, and it stands for research, the first step. So typically that's going to be the growth strategy. But then obviously when we start working with a brand on a long-term basis, we're going to do that research monthly. So that can be anywhere from customer surveys to interviews to heat map recordings, data analysis. There's about 12 different types of research we can do, and we're going to prioritize based on that. So we start with research. After that, we turn that research into what we call observations. So observations are issues, ideas, and theories that we leverage from the research to be able to optimize any of the key metrics. From that, we calibrate. So typically we're going to have a calibration meeting every 2 weeks with a brand. And those calibration calls are going to make sure we're aligned on what the business objectives are, where the key benchmarks lie, and what experiments we want to run in order to improve them. So there's a bit of an ideation session as part of that, but it's mostly just aligning and making sure we're always on the same track in terms of where we're headed. Following that, we're going to do our Kickstart. So Kickstart is the Kickstart offer, which is that one-time kind of batch everything together into a set of key deliverables. And we're going to have typically 3 or 4 large-scale deliverables, like complete page redesigns, a huge batch of creatives, for example, creating new email flows, those kind of big swing changes. And then we move into E, which is for experiment. And that's where we're going to do things that are a little bit more fine-grained in terms of how we're going to optimize. We might be, testing copy or iterating on creatives on your ads or testing single changes to your email flows, those sorts of things. And then the last is T for translation. And translation is where we take all of the learnings we've gotten from that experimentation, from the research, everything we now know about your customer. We put that into a document at the end of every month. We're going to take all of that information, hand it to you, and you can use that, for example, in new product development. You can use that in your marketing initiatives that we don't touch, for example, your organic. You can use that in your ops, all those sorts of things.
Okay, interesting. And how have you kind of developed that framework? How did it come about?
Yeah, so the way we started using the framework was it didn't really have a name at the beginning. We just like to follow the scientific method, anybody would learn in 7th grade science class sort of thing. We started there creating hypotheses before we ran any experiments, making sure that we had statistical validity, meeting with the brands. And then at some point we decided we wanted a name for it because we had this process that we had in the conversion rate optimization community. It was very standardized. Everybody was doing the same thing, but it wasn't sort of used in the marketing ecosystem or in the retention ecosystem. And so we wanted to be able to expand to that, and we had to come up with a name for it in order to do that. So I think it took about 2 weeks to actually solidify the acronym and identify the processes that we really wanted to highlight. And yeah, that was about a year and a half ago we came up with that.
Okay. It's a good acronym. I guess my next question on this is where does this go in the future? Are there kind of other parts that you want to add to that game plan? How do you see the ecosystem developing, or what do you want to focus on next?
Yeah. So at the moment, we're just focused on really operationalizing the business and coming up with an understanding of, as on an SOP basis, where we're trying to go and what we're trying to do. In the future, I think what we're going to transition to is more of we might want to start taking over that marketing ecosystem a little bit more. So at the moment, we don't have management plans is what we call them. So we do optimization or strategy rather than handling the day-to-day. In the future, that's something we're going to transition to more, I think, is handling that day-to-day as we grow and as we have the bandwidth to be able to do that. It's definitely something we're getting asked for from the brands that we're working with, but we want to make sure that we have the team in place to do that before we start offering that as a service.
2 questions on that. So one is how do you get the feedback as you're going? So let's say you've come up with the idea, you've given it to the brand of what they need to improve. And if there's an agency kind of integrating it, are they giving you feedback and what kind of are you looking at? And then 2, do you think brands are more open to this kind of offering rather than the kind of multiple single service vendors? The first one is just on feedback. So let's say you've given given the brand, the game plan, they've passed that along to the agency. What does the feedback process look like?
Yeah, so on the kind of implementation side of things, typically what we're going to do is actually handle it all ourselves. So even if you're working with an agency, for example, they're doing your meta ads, and we see that there's an optimization opportunity for your offer. We're going to test out a new offer for new client or new customer acquisition. In that case, we're going to develop the creatives. We have access to the account. We'll typically set up the experiment. We want to make sure that we have all of the necessary effect that we need to have. And so to do that, we need to actually do the setup, run the experiment ourselves, analyze and track the data. So we're going to handle that. We're going to do it. Once we have the learning in place, then we can typically hand that off to the agency partner and they can implement on it if need be. But we do have the team in place in order to handle the actual meta ads. Obviously, we have the developers and all of that in place to handle anything on the website, and then the same for emails and retention.
Okay. And then my second question was just in terms of brands' openness to this kind of offering. Do you think they're more open to it now, or do you think they still want a kind of single service vendor kind of relationship?
So the brands that we're working with specifically do want someone to come in and handle kind of the entire sales funnel. I think that's the ideal. It takes a lot off the founding team's shoulders, or if they have a CMO in place, whatever. It takes a lot of the worry off their shoulders. And I think the process helps a lot. A lot of brands, when they're working with an agency, there's this question of if sales go up, where's the source of those sales going up? Was it something that the brand was doing? Is it a new product launch? Was it just the ecosystem? Was it the paid ads? Was it the agency? And the agency always wants to take credit if they can, right? Typical. However, the brand doesn't always want to believe them, especially if there's some sort of performance fee or performance basis. There's this justification of both sides wanting to take responsibility for the positive impacts and nobody wanting to take responsibility for the negative impacts if sales go down. Whereas with experimentation, there's always a very clear uplift that we've had. So if the experiment wasn't successful, we know how much sales went down as a result of that, and we take full responsibility for that. But on the upside of that, when sales go up, we know exactly how much they went up and what our portion of that contribution was. And brands really like knowing that, because at the end of the month, we can say, this is exactly what impact that we had on your revenue. And we can be highly confident in the actual number that we're showing to the brand.
Okay, because I guess it's, like you said, it's the science of hypothesis. Here's the test we're going to run. Here's the outcome. And here's the metrics we kind of measured.
Exactly. Fun. Yeah. And then we can multiply that against the revenue of the platform that we're testing on, and we come out with a number at the other side.
Okay. Well, look, Byron, that brings me to the end of today's interview. It's been a pleasure having you on.
It's
I
been
guess
great to be here, Jordan.
thank you. The first question I have to round off is just if any brand owners want to get in touch with you, how can they do so, and what kind of size should they be, what sector, etc.?
Yeah. So if you want to get in touch with me, the best place is going to be LinkedIn. I post on there pretty frequently. So that's linkedin.com/IN/Byron Lane Hill. Yeah. In terms of the size of brands, we're typically looking to work with brands that are doing that kind of mid 7-figure range down to the low 7-figure range. We do work with a couple of brands up into the 8 figures, but 7 figures seems to be our sort of sweet spot at the moment. In terms of number of orders, we're looking for brands that are doing about 1,000 orders per month or more.
Okay. And then final question is, do you think there would be anyone that you know in your network that would be a good fit to come on the podcast as well?
Ooh, good question. Nicholas Olea might be someone that would be really good to be on the pod, to be honest.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Byron. Thanks for coming on, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jordan. Cheers.